to Seeing Things. This is Colette and I am your host. This is part 2 of Mothman Prophecies. We're covering chapters 3 and 4 today. And I hope you had a chance to follow along. If you want to go back and listen to the first of this episode, if you haven't already, please do, because it just goes in order, obviously. That's how chapters work. This is where the story really starts to take place as far as what Mothman is all about. I hope you're prepared for the strange stuff that's about to happen. So let's just jump right in, okay? The Flutter of Black Wings is chapter 3. Another kind of man in black haunted Brooklyn, New York, 1877 through 1880. He had wings and performed aerial acrobatics over the heads of crowds of sunbathers at Coney Island. A Mr. W.H. Smith first reported these strange flights September 18th, 1877. The creature was not a bird, but a winged human form. So he starts off with some stories in our recent history about winged flying beings, men mostly, or human looking, humanoid type things that have wings. And there's a significant amount of sightings of different things. So the flying man became a local sensation, and according to New York Times, September 12th, 1880, many reputable persons saw him as he was engaged in flying toward New Jersey. He goes on explaining that Leonardo da Vinci studied the flights of birds in the 15th century, about all the people who worked on building flying machine type things, and how it couldn't have been that. According to the reports and the eyewitnesses, what they saw was aerial acrobatics, actual movements that weren't possible at that time with the technology that existed. So he's kind of writing off the idea that it was a human performing stunts in some sort of flying machine, that was not possible during the time. 1877 through 1880, that seems pretty early for any flying machines. It was not until May 2nd, 1962 that a man really succeeded in flying under his own power. Mr. John C. Wimpenny flew 993 yards at an altitude of 5 feet in a contraption with rigid wings and a pedal-driven propeller at Hatfield, Herefordshire in England. So that was a significant amount of time later, that 1962. That's a long time later. So it's been known how to accomplish it, but actually accomplishing it to create bird-like movement in wings, which these flying beings are attributed with, that to create that movement has not been possible in technology. No human, that is, machines flying through the air with moving wings have frequently been sighted during UFO waves. In 1905, a Titanic white bird fluttered around California. It seems that from the late 1800s, early 1900s, people were spotting a decent amount of these winged beings. So he does list a lot of different people who were very credible people within their community who witnessed this phenomenon and reported it. So there's a lot of stories here. I'm not going to bother sharing all these stories. There's just a lot of them from all across the country. Texas, Florida, oh my goodness, Illinois, South Dakota. They're everywhere. I'm not going to bother mentioning most of them just because that's a lot to talk about. Okay, the next big year for our Phantom Flyers was 1961. Residents along Florida's Tamiami Trail began seeing what one woman described as a big vulture with a wingspan of about 55 feet. Isn't that sort of unusual? In May 1961, a New York pilot was buzzed by a damned big bird, bigger than an eagle. For a moment, I doubted my sanity because it looked more like a pterodactyl out of the prehistoric past. The thing had swooped at his plane as he cruised up the Hudson River Valley. Also, Hudson River Valley does tend to have a lot of activity, which I haven't studied that one as much as the Ohio River, but the Ohio River Valley Okay, and then they start bringing Point Pleasant in at this time. Far away in the Ohio River Valley, another startled pair had an even more breathtaking experience. A woman prominent in civic affairs in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, was driving on Route 2 along the Ohio River with her elderly father. As they passed through a sector on the edge of a park known as the Chief Cornstalk Hunting Grounds, a tall man-like figure suddenly appeared on the road in front of them. I slowed down, she told me years later. As we got closer, we could see that it was much larger than a man, a big gray figure. It stood in the middle of the road, then a pair of wings unfolded from its back, and they practically filled the whole road. It almost looked like a small airplane. Then it took off straight up, disappearing out of sight in seconds. We were both terrified. I stepped on the gas and raced out of there. We talked it over and decided not to tell anybody about it. Who would believe us anyway? So that was a report in 1961 of the Point Pleasant area and a strange winged human form. And that shooting straight into the air, that one's fascinating. That would be super impressive and terrifying to see. Just something like shooting straight up into the air, like just taking off with like massive wing pulses, I guess. I'm not sure what you would call that. Flapping. Okay, so one of my most favorite stories here, because it's so bizarre, Vietnam had a bunch of sightings. Soldiers in Vietnam had a bunch of sightings. If you're not familiar with some of the stories that soldiers came back with after the Vietnam War, that's a really interesting thing to look into. There is some crazy stuff that happened over there. I mean, you know, you hear the night vision goggles thing where they're like seeing demons, but there's so much more than that. If it was just that, you'd be like, yeah, maybe some fluke, I don't know what happened, but the amount of strange paranormal activity that was terrifying to the men there, like, it's so much more than, like, you never see it in one place compiled. I would like to see a book on paranormal activities that happened during the Vietnam War, just to see what all at the time. But this story itself is one of my favorites out of the Flying Men legends. But we have a naked woman with wings in our collection. The case was investigated by Don Worley, an experienced student of the unknown who interviewed the witness in depth. He is a reliable observer, Worley notes, and he swears that this event is well beyond the capacity of his imagination. Earl Morrison, the witness, was serving as a private, first class in the Marine Corps in Vietnam in the summer of 1969. He and two buddies were sitting on top of a bunker near Da Nang on a warm summer evening. And it switches to his tale. All of a sudden, I don't know why, we all three looked out there in the sky and we saw this figure coming toward us, he told Mr. Worley. It kind of had a glow, and we couldn't make out what it was at first. It started coming toward us real slowly. All of a sudden we saw what looked like wings, like a bat's, only it was gigantic compared to what a regular bat would be. After it got close enough so we could see what it looked like a woman, a naked woman. She was black. Her skin was black, her body was black, the wings were black. Everything was black, but it glowed. It glowed in the night, kind of a greenish cast to it. There was a glow on her and around her. Everything glowed, looked like she glowed and threw off a radiance. We saw her arms toward the wings, and they looked like regular molded arms. Molded arms, each with a hand and fingers and everything, but they had skin from the wings going over them. And when she flapped her wings, there was no noise at first. It looked like her arms didn't have any bones in them because they were limber, just like a bat's. She started going over us, and we still didn't hear anything. She was right above us, when she got over the top of our heads, she was maybe 6 or 7 feet up. We couldn't do anything. We didn't know what to do. We just froze. We just watched what was going over because we couldn't believe our eyes. So we watched her go straight over the top of us, and still she didn't make any noise, flapping her wings. She blotted out the moon. That's how close she was to us. As we watched her, she got about 10 feet or so away from us. We started hearing her wings flap, and it sounded, like regular wings flapping, and she just started flying off, and we watched her for quite a while. The total time, when we first saw her and could almost define her, until we lost sight of her and were unable to define her, was between 3 or 4 minutes. That's a crazy story. That was when was that? 1969, summer of 1969. Vietnam had a huge UFO wave, 68 through 69, which included an epidemic of phantom helicopters. On several occasions, the military forces on both sides fired at the objects without effect. And he continues on with more stories along the lines of flying beings, as well as UFO flaps. That pretty much is chapter 3. It's just all of these stories. There's a lot of them. It's definitely worth a read, but I'm not going to break them down too much. Just a backdrop of what was happening previous to this tale. Maybe even some validity to this wasn't just a one-off thing. This was something that was happening. And maybe because we don't see it usually compiled in one place, we don't understand how prevalent it was. Now we're moving on to chapter 4. Actually, chapter 3 wasn't even that long. Chapter 4, Take the Train. Okay, so he starts this chapter talking about how prevalent this was to be seen in the newspapers, how the newspapers had so many different theories, like marsh gas for some of the lights that they were seeing. So much of the reports being, they went into the newspapers, like people knew that this was happening because it was being reported on. So wherever you were in the year 1966, you must have heard about the coming of the flying saucers. The news media beat the story into a froth of ennui. The newsstands were glutted with one-shot UFO magazines and quickie paperbacks rehashing the reported sightings from previous flap years. So there was a lot of excitement about this. People were showing up on hilltops, and they really thought like there was this big, we're coming to Earth kind of thing, which is honestly kind of reminiscent about where we're at right now. I feel like a lot of people are on the edge of this. And if you go back to the whole ultra-terrestrial theory that John Keel has, where it's coming from within the Earth, what I don't hear him talk too much about is this possible? Like, is it possible that there's just going to be this, like, we're here? He doesn't seem to have a theory on that in regards to any of the contact they've made. There doesn't seem to be any, well, according to what's happened within this era of all the UFO sightings and the flaps and all the things that happened, there was never like we're coming, expect us. There didn't seem to be that, but the people still expected it and anticipated it. So you'd meet on hilltops and beaches, just to watch light, the orbs. And it says the year of the Garuda was at hand. What does he mean by that? What's a Garuda? I've never actually looked up what a Garuda is. A mythical bird-like creature from Hindu and Buddhist traditions. Okay. So he calls it the year of the Garuda. Anyways, a big flying winged being. The year of the Garuda was at hand. A dark force was closing over a little town I had never heard of, Point Pleasant, West Virginia. We mentioned it previously, but this is his first introduction to it. In a matter of months, I would be arriving there like some black-suited exorcist, lugging my tattered briefcase, waving the golden cross of science. My life would become intertwined with the lives of the people of the Ohio Valley. This really kicked off so much for him. In March 1966, a shapely housewife, whom I will call Mrs. Kelly because she asked her name be withheld, was waiting in her car for her children near the Point Pleasant School when she saw an unbelievable apparition low in the sky. It looked like a glistening metal disc and was hovering directly above the school playground. That would be terrifying. A door-like aperture was open at its rim, and there was a man standing outside. He was not standing in the doorway. He was standing outside the object in mid-air. He wore a silvery skin-tight costume and had very long silvery hair. He was looking down into the schoolyard intently. She watched him for a long moment until her children bounded up to the car. When she looked again, the man and object were gone. She decided not to tell anyone about this strange vision, attaching religious significance to it. That summer, Mrs. Hellier was driving along the Ohio side of the river when a sudden glint in the sky attracted her attention. At first, I thought it was a plane, she recalled. Then I got a better look at it. It was perfectly round, and I couldn't make out what it was, but I didn't give it any thought at the time. So they show up in the form of UFOs, like pretty traditional it seems. There was various farmers, various people within the community who witnessed these things happening. And not a lot of them really talked to each other. So at first people weren't really like letting everyone know what was going on. They commented on how other communities, like in Salt Lake City, they weren't so quiet about it. Like there were other people in other places during this time, 1966, who were reporting and telling about a bird as big as a Piper Cub airplane circled that Mormon community on July 18th, 1966. Some people ran for cover while others ran for their telephones. In Scott, Mississippi, a woman grabbed her telephone and called the Delta Democrat Times in Greenville. She and her neighbors were watching a whitish man-shaped flying object. It got down pretty low and then would go up, Mrs. Eichhardt said. I never saw anything like it. So throughout the country, there were some reports of various objects being reported, and Point Pleasant wasn't as talkative about it. I mean, being a small southern town, I suppose that tracks. You don't want people to think you're crazy. Southerners tend to be, well, these other places were Southerners though. I don't know, for whatever reason, they weren't as vocal about it. So he has very much reinforced all the activity that he could find in his research that was going on at the time. He very much wanted everyone to know that this isn't a one-off thing. This isn't isolated. This was a phenomenon that was being experienced by everyone. And I appreciate that because this book was written in, what was it, 75 I said? I can't remember. In the 70s. I think early 70s. And to think how different we see things now, which is super interesting. I think that we don't hear about this kind of stuff. We definitely, as a population here in America, as a culture, we don't know that this was going on then for the most part. I feel like it's in niche little pockets, like mine, for example, my community here that I have, that we like to talk about this stuff. But that is such a small community. To be perfectly honest, when I bring this topic up with various people, to me it's commonplace knowledge just because I'm in it and I have understood what it means to us as a culture for so much of the time of the existence of the United States. Like it's been prominent, and I feel like now you're looked at as a crazy person if you're like into this stuff or you believe it. And I'm like, but it's been here. It's only recent that it's really been frowned upon to, for sure, back in these times even, it was hard to say, yeah, I believe it, but it was so prevalent that it was much less scrutinized or deemed as crazy. So I definitely feel there's a very different vibe to the culture about how it responds to this sort of thing. So I do appreciate him laying out the groundwork of, this is widespread. And because we relied on newspapers back then, I think that maybe there was a little more believability of the people that it was like happening with. They were just people in the community, and everyone knew that. There was more of a village experience back then. So when someone said this happened, and then like 5 other people were like, yeah, me too. Like, I'm pretty sure most people were just like, oh, that happened, I'm sure there's naysayers in all the experiences, but it does blow my mind how different of an experience it would be now. And I can attest to this on some small level, because when I've shared my experiences, people are just like, and they're like keeping so much from you, and you see it on their face, where they're just like, cool. And they're just super not interested in having a conversation about it. And that's fine. But you know what they're thinking, and it's weird how isolated these events are now because of the amount of people in between everything. It's not like everyone stepped out. Oh, and how much time people spend inside their houses, not outside now, is like staggering. So I feel like if more people were actually spending time outside for larger parts of the day, these would be more shared experiences and less skepticism would be involved. As it stands, when we've experienced things as a family being outside, we do spend a lot of time outside. We are outdoor enthusiasts, but nobody else is outside. No one else is around. Like, you just don't see people outside. We drive by so many beautiful historic homes with these porches, and you know that people used to spend so much time out on their porch a long time ago, and no one is outside. They're either busy working, busy at school, busy doing something, or if they're home, they're usually inside. So that indoor culture has probably created a lot of disconnect between the experiencers and everyone else who is skeptical of the experiencers. So bringing it back to these stories, knowing that a mass majority of these people, because of the way they lived back in the 60s, they were outside a lot and they saw a lot more. Like, 5 different people within your community saw it all at the same time, and you all know each other. There's not a reason to disbelieve. So yeah, it's a crazy different world now. Had to go grab myself a cup of coffee, as usual. I cannot make it through one of these sessions without a cup of coffee. It is allergy season, and my allergies are raging, so let's get back to it. Oh. Now, he's getting into some maybe abstract thinking in terms of ufology like 3,000 years ago, and honestly, I'm not really going to go heavily into this because this is something where you just need to sit with it. But essentially, he's getting into mythologies, very old mythologies, and how we form our ideas of God and where some of our traditions of God came from and how it's related to UFO phenomenon throughout time, and how we have throughout ancient history within these different cultures ways that people came up with describing what it was they were seeing to the best of their ability that has been converted throughout the thousands of years into religions or mythologies that don't necessarily get put into, if you're a UFO enthusiast or somebody who studies cryptids, you understand that this stuff has been around for a very long time, obviously through our traditions, but that it has not been translated that by the mass culture. It's a different way of seeing things. So that's, and he does mention, this is super interesting, there was a report of giants. So the giant phenomenon is also interesting. The report of a 9-foot-tall humanoid strolling down the main street of Buffalo Mills, Pennsylvania on August 19th, 1973 was no more outlandish than the dinosaurs who appear from time to time to terrify witnesses and baffle police posses. In 1969, there were dinosaurs reported in Texas. That is super reminiscent of, I don't know if you've seen the show, the TV show on Amazon, I believe it was called Outer Range, and they had, I don't remember if they actually showed dinosaurs, but they showed woolly mammoths, I do believe, prehistoric animals coming through, and a herd of bison that hadn't been in the area for a very long time. It reminded me of that. In 1970, the police in Italy scoured a mountain range after several witnesses reported seeing a saurian. Saurian? What is a saurian? Let's see, all the things I get to look up. Saurian means resembling or relating to lizards. It comes from the new Latin term sauria, which refers to a group of reptiles, including lizards. Okay, so basically referring to a dinosaur, essentially. I figured that because that was the topic. So it seems to be some sort of time travel mixed in. I'm still so curious about this. Where does the dinosaur lore come in? I don't know. It has to be some sort of time phenomenon that overlaps things. While the amateur investigators tend to concentrate on the very subjective descriptions of the observers, I probed deeper and studied the witnesses themselves. That he calls it out himself, he's very self-aware. His approach to studying this stuff is very different from other people. They're super focused on the thing that was reported to have been seen. They're trying to break down, what was this? Or I don't know, the focus usually tends to be on the thing. And John Keel tends to look at the people and their stories and like sees more of a collective picture of this whole thing. And that's really helpful. I even find that when studying these things, you find ufologists or, people who are hyper focused on outer space and like that's their thing. And you have cryptozoologists who are only interested in Bigfoot. Or you have, Mothman. I find that if you're into Mothman, usually you're into several other things as well. Or if you're like into paranormal research, you're only looking at ghosts, or you're only interested in hearing things about ghosts. It's like dismissive of any other kind of phenomena being connected to it. Most people, at least. They don't cross over real well. They don't want to hear each other's theories. They don't want to understand how it could be related on any level. And John Keel does not segregate and separate his subjects. It's like, what else was going on at the time? What else could be relevant? Is this relevant? Was this coincidence? Maybe not. He asks a lot more questions. Also isn't threatened by theories. And so I actually prefer to take that approach to all of the investigation I do myself, all the reading, research. I don't dismiss something because I don't agree with where it's coming from. It's like there's something to be gained from learning about it. And once again, I didn't come into any of this with a viewpoint. I've mentioned that before. I didn't come into this with a belief system in place where I'm like, I need things to back up my belief system. I wasn't coming at it from religious, or there was nothing backing it up. It was just simply like curiosity. I've had these experiences, or I've heard this interesting thing. And I don't know, I think I have a broad range of curiosity, and that is my favorite way to approach it. I think I've just learned so much more. I've also had more experiences that way. When you try and live in a way where everything needs to back up what you believe, your belief system's in place, it really limits your experiences, and mostly because you are an antenna. And if you're not approaching it from the perspective that you are attracting these things to yourself, and positive, negative, however it comes to you, and that's important too. You need to know that you're approaching things with the right kind of mindset. If you're scared, like if you're fearful of everything, or if you're approaching everything as if it's like something that's coming at you or attacking you, you're going to have negative experiences. I do very much believe in that. Not that you can't come across negative things. I mean, I don't want to dismiss those people who weren't seeking out negative experiences and still had them. But I do think a lot of that is within your perception of the experience itself. Maybe not as much in the energy of the being or the thing that you approached. Anyway, that's a tangent to say that I prefer to see more of a broad spectrum. So if you're coming into this and you're like unsure about how you feel about, maybe you're into cryptozoology, because I have posted a lot of Bigfoot stuff so far. If you're interested in that and you just took a risk on this podcast, if you're going to continue forward with this and you have some skepticism, just know that I'm not saying this is the way it is. I'm saying that this is useful to know while approaching this subject. I think it's applicable to anyone in any life circumstances, because it clearly exists here with us, and knowing as much as you can about it is nothing but helpful. It helps you have more experiences in a more controlled environment, because it's not catching you off guard. And maybe you will form some belief systems around it, and I think that's okay. But the more open you are to hearing things, the better experiences I believe you're going to have. It doesn't mean you have to believe everything you hear. Just open the possibilities of like, what if it was like that? Like, for example, I am not a flat earth theorist, and I think I've mentioned this before. I'm not a flat earth theorist. I love listening to flat earth theory though, because I consider it a brain exercise. It's a really fantastic brain exercise. You're like, what if it was like this? To this day, and this is probably because I am on the spectrum, but I do not understand people who are threatened by like flat earth theory, or someone who believes different from you, no matter how outlandish it is. I'm like, what a magnificent use of imagination to believe something to be different than it is believed by the people, like general population, to be. Like, that is a really useful way to use your imagination, because when you start experiencing life with more imagination and less like programming, you break the system a little bit in your own mind. Not not breaking the system, breaking your attachment to the system, and it gives you the opportunity to have more experiences within that system. And I realize when you subscribe to come to this earth, you're born here, there's a system in place on some level. I mean, you need to eat. That's kind of a basic thing for humans. You need to drink water. There's a system in place for survival. That's not a bad thing, but to branch out and imagine things to be different than they are, I think is helpful to not be stuck in like it's not a prison. Then you start breaking out and start having better or more experiences. It's less prison-like at that point. I mean, maybe you don't relate to the whole prison idea, but for a lot of people exploring the paranormal, I've found that they're just looking for more than what's in front of them. And don't be afraid to use your imagination and look at somebody else's theory that maybe you disagree with, or that you can't bring yourself to admit might be true, and still just like listen to it. Just listen to it and imagine that it were true. It won't hurt you. Trust me, it won't hurt you. Instead, say, that was really interesting, without necessarily adopting any of it, but you could get something from it that would be more interesting. I think that's a better way to be. That's a really good higher vibrational way to be, to consider hearing other people and then using your own judgment and discernment. That's why we have a prefrontal cortex. It's developed hopefully enough to say, I disagree with this because it goes against my logic thinking in this way. You still have that freedom to do that, even if you're listening to views that are different from your own. So I hope we've established that at this point, in which case moving forward is a little bit easier when you're considering all the possibilities. And John Keel is the epitome of that. He seems to listen to everyone and be like, could be related. Let me see. Let's pull some data. What does that look like statistically? Maybe he's probably on the spectrum. He's probably very autistic, but all the best people are, so, thank God for those. He says, I probed deeper and studied the witnesses themselves. Many I found suffered certain medical symptoms such as temporary amnesia, severe headaches, muscular spasms, excessive thirst, and other effects, all of which have been observed throughout history in religious miracles. Oh yeah, and he goes into the religious miracles part. That is another super fascinating topic. The appearance of religious apparitions, demonology, occult phenomena, and contacts with fairies. All of these manifestations clearly share a common source or cause. I agree with that. They're too consistently linked together to not be related. While chimeras can come in all sizes and shapes, ranging from 20-foot giants to animated tin cans, tin can reference if you're into Hellier at all. This was the first tin can reference. I love Hellier, but tin can reference. And we actually, back in our videos of our first Bigfoot expedition to the Uwari, it was a super exciting day for me. I really wanted to break into this energy, to go feel it out. And we had set out, my husband and I had set out on this adventure, super hopeful, and it was hot on the heels of having watched Hellier for the second time. And when we got there, we found, before we even started on our trail, we found a happy birthday balloon, which, once again, if you're familiar with Hellier, you'll understand the reference. But like every time we have been to the Uwari, we have found a happy birthday balloon. And that's significant. We've never found them previously. We're in the middle of nowhere when we find them. It's just super interesting. But the first time we went, we also found a tin can. We had sat down for me to do, we were going to eat lunch, and then I was going to do a dowsing rod session, and there was a tin can sitting there. And we had just been talking about the balloon and how crazy it was that we had found one, because that was the first time we've ever found a balloon at all out hiking or on a trail. So we found that. We're like, that was really interesting. And yeah, I feel like you're really gonna get some communication out here for some reason. It feels very haunted out there, or just the energies are up where you're like, if something was gonna come through, it would come through here. And I was, just getting stoked about it. And we went to go sit down on the rock, and there was just, once again, this is pretty out there. I mean, I realize there's people that can camp out there, but this was fairly out there, and we sat down on this rock, and there was this tin can just sandwiched between the two rocks. We're like, that's really crazy. And we ended up having some really interesting conversations at that rock. So check out that video if you're interested in that topic at all. It was really good. We've started forming some sort of relationship with the energies that I believe we are communicating with a Sasquatch type being, but multiple of them. Whatever it is we're communicating with out there, they're very communicative when we're there. Anyway, back to the tin can. Now, this was animated tin can. I have never seen that. That would be so freaky to see an animated tin can talking. The most fascinating type is the one who has appeared in almost every country on Earth. In other ages, he was regarded as the devil incarnate. He dressed in black and rode a black horse. Later, he arrived in black horse-drawn carriages, even in hearses. Today, he steps out of flying saucers in remote farm fields. He is built exactly like us, stands from 5 feet 6 inches to 6 feet tall, looks very human but has high cheekbones, unusually long fingers, and an oriental cast to his features. His complexion is olive or reddish. He speaks every language, sometimes mechanically as if he is reciting a memorized speech, sometimes fluently. He has trouble breathing, often wheezing and gasping between words. I think you know where this is going. Like our dinosaur and hairy bipeds, he often leaves a few footprints behind. Footprints which suddenly end as if he vanished into thin air. I have been chasing these critters for 25 years and have traveled from Tibet, the land of abominable snowmen, to West Virginia, home of the strangest unknown bird. In the course of all these adventures and frenetic activities, I have come to reject outright the popular extraterrestrial hypothesis. My long and very expensive excursions into the borderland where the real and unreal merge have failed to produce any evidence of any kind to support the idea that we are entertaining shy strangers from some other galaxy. That's from his research. He's come to the conclusion these are not extraterrestrials, anything he's dealt with. Especially, he just described the Men in Black, by the way. That's what he was talking about. The strangest of all the phenomena is these Men in Black characters. And his firm conviction is ultra-terrestrialism coming from within the Earth, which there's a lot of different ways to look at that, and I'm not going to get into that right now. But ultra-terrestrialism, it's not coming from outer space in his opinion. And where I stand on that, I'm not sure the percentage of ultra-terrestrial to extraterrestrial. I have varying different theories because I use a lot of his beliefs mixed with other theories I've heard. But I am actually a big believer of ultra-terrestrialism for these encounters specifically, and also with things like Bigfoot. Rather, I have come to realize that we have been observing complex forces which have always been an essential part of our immediate environment. Instead of thinking in terms of extraterrestrials, I have adopted the concept of ultra-terrestrials, beings and forces which coexist with us but are on another time frame. That is, they operate outside the limits of our space-time continuum, yet have the ability to cross over into our reality. This other world is not a place, however, as Mars or Andromeda are places, but it is a state of energy. If you're into the dimensional theories, especially like time travel, or just time in general, time theories, how time is vibrational space. They're layers. So everything's happening all at once, all the time. It's vibrational frequencies. So when you're talking about paranormal activity within your house, it exists outside of time. You're having a crossover, and there's points where within the earth that like things cross over because of energetic frequency, like interference from frequencies. I love looking at Tesla's and Einstein's various theories on time and understanding how this works. But what John Keel says definitely tracks with how things have reacted on a paranormal level. That is a whole thing. I am not going to take the time to go into that. But ultra-terrestrialism really reinforces that idea that these are dimensional places. These are vibrational states. So someone once said, I can't even remember what I was listening to when I heard this, but it stuck with me, that if you were to go back in time, say 200 years, you went to go see the pioneers going out west on their wagon trails, what would you see? What would it be like? And someone was like, well, you wouldn't see anything. You couldn't, because you're not on the same vibrational frequency. It's like going back in time. It's changing your vibrational frequency, but they were actually talking about the time being a fixed point and you're going back to it. But that those beings would be vibrating at a different place. So my mind is like, well, you are there, but vibrationally it is not that thing because it is different, but it all is existing at the same time. Anyway, there's so much that can be said about that. I'm not going to bother because I'm actually super not knowledgeable about this. I just like to hear about it, and I can tell you some of the things I've latched on, but I'm not very knowledgeable about time travel. That is something that takes so much more brain cells than I have access to right now, but that has to be stated because I feel like that's a huge part of ultra-terrestrialism, is having just a really basic knowledge about that theory. The UFO phenomenon itself is only one trivial fragment of a much larger phenomenon. It can be divided into two main parts. The first and most important part consists of the mysterious aerial lights, which appear to have an intelligence of their own. They have been observed throughout history. Often they project powerful searchlight beams toward the ground. Persons caught in these beams undergo remarkable changes of personality. And he goes through all of the crazy phenomenon, like the things that happen to people when they are captured in these beams or have these interactions. Like he even talks about Saul, the Jewish tent maker, the story in the Bible, was zapped by one of these beams on the road to Damascus, and it blinded him for 3 days. Also very common of like more modern experiences where people were blinded by a light because of the radiation effects. He was converted to Christianity on the spot and became St. Paul. The second part of the phenomenon consists of the cover or camouflage for the first part. The meandering nocturnal lights, as the Air Force has labeled them. If these lights appeared in cycles, year after year, century after century, without any occupying explanatory manifestations, they would cause much greater fear and concern. But explanatory manifestations have accompanied them always. And these manifestations have always adjusted to the physiology and beliefs of each particular period in time. Once again, going back to the adjustment of the belief system. So how much are we affecting, how much are they coming from our belief systems? I don't know. That one's a complicated one. The flying saucer extraterrestrial visitants are not real in the sense that a 747 airliner is real. They are transmogrifications of energy under the control of some unknown extra-dimensional intelligence. This intelligence controls important events by manipulating specific human beings through the phenomenon of mystical illumination. Our religions are based upon our long-time awareness of this intelligence and our struggle to reduce it to humanly acceptable terms. And he goes through talking about how throughout time, a lot of people just believed that it was the Air Force was the culprit, and that the government agents were tapping the phones of the people and tampering with their mail and following them around in black Cadillacs. I would say that most people believe that the the government is the one sending out the men in black in Cadillacs, black Cadillacs. And it's definitely not. They are just as confused about it, or were just as confused about it as we were. I'm sure people know more now than maybe in the 1970s. Maybe not, I don't know. So yeah, our religious beliefs and our occult beliefs, our beliefs, our philosophies and our cultures are affected, have always been affected by this phenomenon. It's like a guidance. It's just the software writers, I think. On some level, sometimes I'm like, it's just the software writers popping up to help guide things along if you're really into matrix theories. That's not completely untrue. I mean, not to reduce it to this simple explanation of software writer, it just still seems to be too spotty and not precise. Like it's tricking us on some level, which is weird. Yeah, the Men in Black subject is still super strange to me. The ancient Chinese marked out the routes of the lights in the sky and called them dragon tracks, because apparently fearsome dragons appeared with the mysterious lights. So in a later age, these became fairy lights and were associated with the little people who actually plagued whole generations, not only in Europe, but also in North America. For the American Indians were telling stories about the little people long before the Europeans arrived here. And that is true in our local area specifically. Little people and the Bigfoot phenomenon have been always linked here. Like where we are in Winston-Salem is technically a part of the Uwharrie mountain range. You can call it a mountain range. They're very low. They're very, very, very ancient mountains. And the Native Americans held a lot of traditions in this area of the Bigfoot. I don't remember what they called them, but the Bigfoot population were hunters, and they lived alongside them at some point. And they became less and less as it became more populated, but they handed their traditions down to the German and the French and the Irish settlers that came here. And there were certain places, like there's a cave system here locally that honestly a lot of locals don't know about within the city. But that is where when it was being settled here, there were these bluffs which led to some caves, and the Native Americans were telling the locals, do not pursue them to those caves, do not pursue them at all. Here's how we handle it. You keep your gaze down and be respectful, but the little people are not to be bothered. Don't chase after them, don't bother them, don't talk to them. They were less nervous, it seems, about the Bigfoot population, but they all went into this cave system. Like that's where they all came from. And it seems to be consistent even throughout the Uwharrie. Like there's a lot of mining and caves in the Uwharrie. And I'd call it more like portal access points, but the little people were real here, like once upon a time. And there's some really negative experiences that people have had for the past couple hundred years. This area was settled in the 1750s by the Moravians, and they're superstitious by nature. They also took very seriously what the native inhabitants told them of this area, and were really big about creating their own energetic bubble. And within that, they felt protected, and you could still feel the energy of that space. Like that has not faded at all, but they warned that outside of that, crazy things happened, manifestations, activities that would put you at risk. So because of that, they warned, if you're not within our bubble, you're fair game. But the little people were part of that warning that there was some activity, trickster activity, and it wasn't safe. So we have a long lore about that. Now, I haven't heard about any recent sightings of little people that I know of in the area, but definitely Bigfoot. Bigfoot still to this day is sighted in this area quite frequently. All right, so he also links up the witchcraft craze, like the Salem witch trials, that kind of thing. People swore that they saw witches flying through the air with lanterns hanging from the front of their brooms. He talks about the vampire legends of Middle Europe, very identical to the modern UFO lore. So up until the late 19th century, the devil existed as a physical personage to many people. Oh yeah, and he brings up how we have context to some of this thing due to some of these things because of our comic books and various other media sources, where we are familiar with the idea of a UFO or a spaceship, it's in our culture to understand it from that context. Belief says the gods of ancient Greece were among us in a new guise, but still holding the old line, believe. Belief is the enemy. The people of the Middle Ages were as convinced of the reality of the little people in their underground palaces as you might be of extraterrestrial civilizations, with gleaming cities of glass on some far-off planet. He goes into more detail about some sightings that happened in October of 1966 from various people. This is in West Virginia. In the weeks that followed, the lights and some dark objects of awesome size were seen from one end of the state to another. In Sisterville, a town mentioned in the 1897 airship reports, local UFO fans organized an informal warning system, calling each other on party lines to announce curtly, UFO, Northeast, etc. The town's newspaper did not bother to publish a single report. Every night at approximately 8 p.m., one of these brilliant flashing lights would cruise majestically over the Ohio River, traversing Point Pleasant from north to south. Those who bothered to notice it at all assumed it was an airplane. Mrs. Kelly, the lady who had seen the long-haired man standing in the sky 7 months earlier, lived in a house on the edge of a deep gully. She and her children were seeing blinding globes of light traveling close to the ground along the gully nightly, and her telephone was behaving strangely, ringing when there was no one on the line, and sometimes emitting beeps like a Morse code. This is another phenomenon. Their phones are heavily affected. They get lots of phone calls and no one's there. Their phones are heavily involved, which that's changed so much now that we have mobile phones. I'm wondering how much phone activity how many people get messed with via their phone. I mean, it messes with some of our recording devices sometimes, like batteries can be drained or SD cards cleared, but I haven't had any strange phone phenomenon. On November 2nd, 1966, he said he and another workman were driving home to Point Pleasant from their job near Marietta, Ohio, on Interstate 77. As they neared Parkersburg, West Virginia, an elongated object appeared low in the sky and descended directly in front of them. They stopped their car, and a man emerged from the object and walked over to them. He looked like a normal man and was grinning broadly. There's always like this creepy grin, apparently. He wore a black coat and kept his arms folded with his hands out of sight under his armpits. The witness rolled his window down, and there was a very brief conversation. The stranger asked the pair who they were, where they were from, where they were going, and what time it was. Then he strolled back to the dark cylinder, and it rose quickly into the chill, drizzling sky. The two men had a strong emotional reaction to the seemingly pointless encounter. They debated whether they should tell anybody, deciding against it, but the Point Pleasant resident found himself suffering from insomnia. And every time he went to sleep, he'd have strange nightmares, and he started drinking heavily. The man's son, he finally went and told somebody about it, Mrs. Hellier. Who we stated earlier, was the local newspaper. She owned the local newspaper. She wrote stories, and she was in charge of the news. And the man's son called to ask her not to print the story because he was having so many problems in his life because of it. So he also had a Men in Black visit by a scientist fellow, that's what he called him, and he claimed association to John Keel, but John Keel had never heard of him, didn't know who he was, and he had basically told him not to talk about it. So I guess, in some instances they try and intimidate them not to talk about it. So basically he couldn't get much else out of the man trying to talk to him about it, and he was so flustered at what had been going on in his life since this happened. He was like, I'm done. I don't want to talk about it. He couldn't get anything else out of it, and he would have ignored the whole story except for one jarring fact. The same thing happened that same night on the same road to another West Virginian. Unlike the 2 Point Pleasant residents, he had gone to the police with his story. A press conference was held, and he was catapulted into the neverland of the UFO contactees, the center of one of the biggest UFO stories of 1966. That's where this chapter ends. Once again, just reinforcing some of the beliefs of ultra-terrestrialism and covering more stories of bird-like visits across the country. I hope you're enjoying this book. It's not a super long book, so let me see, how many chapters does it have? 19 chapters. So we'll blow through it pretty quick. I'm gonna group some of these chapters together, like 5, 6. I might do like 5, 6, and 7 all together. But I'm really excited. The next one that comes up is talking about Indrid Cold. I love the story of Indrid Cold. Super fascinating. Also, once again, going back to Hellier, if you're familiar with that at all, they go into Indrid Cold, and I think that was the first time I got interested in Indrid Cold was a few years back when I watched Hellier for the first time. And I'm going to include a lot of information about that story. If you're unfamiliar with it, I highly recommend tuning in next week, because I am going to be I think I'm going to do some shorts on it as well. So just watch for stuff to pop up. I'm really excited about talking about, I don't know if he's a Men in Black. Whatever he is, he purportedly has stuck around and has family here in, I think, Virginia. Maybe West Virginia. Yeah, it's in West Virginia because that's where they were when they were talking about it. But there's there's several people who talk about having interacted with this family group, with Indrid Cold specifically. I can't wait to tell you guys about that. Anyway, I hope you're enjoying this. If you would like to continue hearing more of this stuff, please like and subscribe. I very much would love to continue putting out this content, and I really just need to see that anyone's interested. Is it interesting to you? Please help it grow if you have any desire to hear more. I also would love to hear what you're interested in, because I cover a lot of topics. So after Mothman Prophecies, what else would you like to hear about? I've got a couple different directions I could go in, but I'd really love to hear from you and hear what you think, what you would like to hear about. I know I need to get back to some actual physical ghost hunting or cryptid research. It's been tough getting outside. I have pretty rough fall allergies right now, and I haven't been outside as much as I normally would be. That's going to change soon. I think I'm finally coming to the end of the worst of it. So getting back outside is definitely going to be something I'm going to do. And I can't wait to show you what I have been up to. So I will talk to you all soon. Let me know what you think. Bye.